Paris. Before it became a symbol of elegance, before it was redesigned to impress the world, Paris was a city that pressed down on its people. In the early 18th century, Paris was not planned. It was accumulated. Every generation built on top of the last. Rarely was anything removed. Rarely was anything corrected. Streets followed paths that had once been dirt roads. Property lines followed medieval boundaries. Buildings filled every available space. The city grew inward as much as it grew upward. Paris had no clear shape. From above, it looked tangled. A dense knot of roofs, chimneys, and narrow corridors. Streets twisted unexpectedly. Alleys ended abruptly. Passageways narrowed without warning. Some streets were so narrow that neighbors could shake hands from opposite windows. Sunlight rarely reached the ground. Air barely circulated. Much of Paris lived in shadow. By the early 1700s, nearly 600,000 people lived here. That number alone strained everything: housing, water, food, sanitation. Paris had become too large for its medieval structure. People adapted by compressing themselves into the city. Homes grew taller, 4, 5, sometimes 6 stories high. The lower floors were damp and dark. Moisture crept up the walls. Mold was common. Upper floors were cramped and unstable. Wooden beams sagged. Stairs were steep and uneven. Entire families lived in a single room. Parents, children, grandparents. Sometimes multiple families shared the same space. Privacy did not exist. Silence did not exist. Life spilled into the streets. Doors stayed open for light and air. Voices echoed constantly. The street was an extension of the home. The streets themselves were chaotic. There were no sidewalks, no separation between people and animals. Horses, carts, vendors, children, and beggars all moved through the same narrow space. Traffic jammed easily. Arguments broke out daily. Mud coated everything. Animal waste from horses mixed with human waste dumped directly from windows. Household refuse was thrown into the street. Rain turned everything into a thick, slow-moving sludge. The smell of Paris was constant. It soaked into clothing, into skin, into breath. Visitors often described it as unbearable. Residents simply endured it. At night, Paris transformed. The city did not glow. It disappeared. Only a few oil lamps lined major streets. Many were broken. Many were unlit. Most neighborhoods were completely dark. Shadows filled doorways. Sounds echoed unpredictably. Footsteps behind you could mean nothing, or everything. Crime was common. Pickpockets worked markets and bridges. Thieves hid in alleys. Gangs controlled certain districts. Most people avoided traveling at night unless necessary. Fear shaped daily routines. The Seine River cut through the city like a spine. Paris existed because of the Seine. It supplied water, transportation, food. Boats arrived daily, carrying grain from the countryside, wine from distant regions, stone and timber for construction. Markets clustered near the river. Warehouses lined the banks. The Seine allowed Paris to feed itself, but it was also the city's waste channel. Household waste flowed directly into the water. Slaughterhouses dumped blood and remains. Tanneries released chemicals. The river carried everything away. The water was dark and slow. The smell was constant. Fish struggled to survive, and yet people depended on it completely. They washed clothes in it. They drank from it. They cooked with it. There was no alternative. Paris's bridges were not empty crossings. They were crowded with buildings. Houses rose directly from the stone arches. Shops and workshops operated above the water. People lived entire lives on the bridges. From a distance, the bridges looked solid and massive. From below, they strangled the river. Boats passed through narrow arches with difficulty. Flooding was common, but the bridges were essential. They were centers of trade, of movement, of daily life. They were cities suspended over water. Inside homes, conditions were harsh. Ventilation was poor. Windows were small and often blocked. Fire was both essential and terrifying. Cooking was done over open flames. Candles burned constantly. One careless moment could destroy an entire building. One spark could spread to neighboring houses in minutes. Paris burned often. After each fire, buildings were rebuilt quickly and cheaply. Safety was secondary to necessity. Disease spread easily. Clean water was rare. Sanitation barely existed. Rats moved freely through streets and homes. Fleas carried illness. Smallpox was common. Typhus spread quickly. Cholera outbreaks devastated entire neighborhoods. Medical knowledge was limited. Doctors relied on outdated theories. Treatments were often harmful. Many children never reached adulthood. Death was not hidden. It was part of daily life. Despite everything, Paris was intensely alive. From dawn until nightfall, the streets were filled with movement. Markets dominated daily life. Les Halles, the central market, operated almost continuously. Fish arrived fresh from the coast. Meat hung in open air. Vegetables piled high. Vendors shouted constantly. Prices were negotiated loudly. Arguments were frequent. The smells were overwhelming. Fresh bread mixed with rotting food. Smoke filled the air. Bodies pressed together. This was Paris as it was experienced. Street performers entertained crowds. Musicians played for coins. Jugglers attracted children. Storytellers gathered listeners. Preachers shouted warnings of sin and punishment. Pamphlets circulated ideas. Conversation filled every space. Paris was loud, relentless, never silent. Religion shaped daily life. Church bells rang constantly, marking time, calling people to prayer. Notre Dame stood at the city's center, not as a monument, but as an active institution. People gathered there daily, for worship, for announcements, for judgment. Faith was enforced socially and politically. While the poor struggled, another Paris existed, a Paris of wealth. Aristocrats lived in large townhouses, with private courtyards and gardens. Servants handled daily labor. Carriages transported them through the city. They rarely walked far. Their Paris was quieter, cleaner, more comfortable, but they could never fully escape the city. The poor were always nearby. Versailles symbolized absolute power. Just outside Paris, it displayed unimaginable wealth. Gold-covered walls, endless gardens, lavish ceremonies. While Paris struggled, Versailles celebrated. Taxes burdened the poor heavily. Food prices rose steadily. Bread shortages became common. Hunger spread. By the late 1700s, Paris was tense. Ideas moved quickly. Cafes became centers of discussion. Pamphlets criticized inequality. Enlightenment ideas questioned authority. People talked openly. Anger grew quietly. Crowds gathered easily, sometimes over food, sometimes over rumors. The city felt unstable. Paris had reached its limit. Too dense, too unequal, too strained. When revolution came, it did not surprise the city. It released what had been building for decades. The Paris of the 1700s would disappear. Streets torn apart, buildings demolished. Later, modernization would erase even more. What remains today are fragments. Hidden courtyards, narrow streets. Most of it is gone forever. Through reconstruction, we can return, not to romanticize it, not to glorify it, but to understand it. This was Paris before the French Revolution, a city of life and death, of beauty and filth, of hope and anger. A city that could not continue as it was. To understand why Paris could not continue as it was, you must understand how daily life slowly became unbearable, not dramatic, not sudden, but constant. For the working poor, every day followed the same pattern. They woke early, often before sunrise. Light entered rooms slowly, if at all. Candles were precious. Firewood was expensive. Many began the day already exhausted. Work was physical, manual, relentless. Artisans worked in small workshops attached to their homes. Tailors, shoemakers, metalworkers. Others worked as porters, carrying heavy loads through narrow streets. Some labored along the river. Some cleaned stables. Some collected waste. There was no job security. Illness meant hunger. Injury meant ruin. Women carried a heavy burden. They worked inside the home, and outside it, they cooked, fetched water, cared for children, worked in markets, washed clothes in the river. Many were employed as servants in wealthy households. Long hours, little pay. Their lives were defined by endurance. Children worked early, very early. They ran errands, helped in workshops, sold goods in markets. Education was rare. Most children learned survival before literacy. Many did not live long enough to grow old. Food dominated thought. Bread was the foundation of life. Most families spent the majority of their income on bread alone. When bread was cheap, Paris was calm. When bread became expensive, Paris became dangerous. Bread shortages caused unrest. Long lines formed outside bakeries. Arguments turned violent. Rumors spread quickly. Someone was hoarding grain. Someone was cheating the people. Anger found targets easily. The markets reflected the city's mood. On good days, they were noisy but stable. On bad days, they were volatile. Prices changed constantly. Supplies fluctuated. Vendors were accused of deception. Fights broke out. The crowd could turn hostile in moments. The city authorities struggled to control Paris. The city guard was understaffed, poorly trained, often corrupt. Order depended more on habit than enforcement. When tension rose too high, authority collapsed quickly. Punishment was public. Executions took place in open squares. Crowds gathered to watch. Justice was uneven. The poor were punished harshly. The wealthy often escaped consequence. Public punishment was meant to deter crime. It also reinforced resentment. At the same time, ideas were spreading. Paris was not only crowded with people, it was crowded with words. Pamphlets circulated constantly, cheap, easy to distribute. They criticized the king, the aristocracy, the church. Cafes became centers of discussion. Men and women gathered to talk, to argue, to question. Ideas that had once belonged to philosophers entered daily conversation. Enlightenment thought challenged tradition. Why should power belong to a few? Why should birth determine destiny? Why should hunger exist beside luxury? These questions spread quietly. Persistently, the aristocracy remained largely unaware or uninterested. They lived insulated lives, balls, dinners, ceremonies. Versailles remained a world apart. While Paris struggled, Versailles displayed excess. This contrast was impossible to ignore. As the 1780s approached, pressure increased. Poor harvests worsened food shortages. Prices rose sharply. Bread riots became more frequent. The city felt unstable. Crowds gathered more easily, dispersed more slowly. Fear spread among the elite. Anger spread among the poor. Paris was no longer just overcrowded. It was emotionally charged. The streets felt different, more watchful, more alert. Something was coming. When revolution began, Paris was ready. The city's structure amplified unrest. Narrow streets trapped crowds together. Rumors spread instantly. Masses moved quickly. What had once been chaos became momentum. After the revolution, the old city was blamed. Its narrow streets were seen as dangerous. Its density as a threat. Change was necessary. The medieval city had to go. Over time, Paris was transformed. Streets were widened, buildings demolished. Later, housemen would redesign the city entirely. Straight boulevards replaced tangled alleys. Light replaced shadow. Control replaced disorder. What we see today is not the Paris of the 1700s. That city no longer exists. It was erased, not in a single moment, but gradually. Only fragments remain. Hidden courtyards, a few narrow streets, traces embedded in stone. Most of it survives only in records, in descriptions, in memory. Through reconstruction, we can return briefly. We can walk streets that no longer exist, see homes that have vanished, hear the noise, feel the density, not to celebrate it, but to understand it. Paris before the French Revolution was not a romantic city. It was a human city, crowded, uncomfortable, alive, a city pushed beyond its limits, a city that could not continue as it was. This was Paris, before everything changed.